The Roehampton University Ghost Case. Night always falls the same way in Roehampton. The sky, just a golden orange, slowly fades to a pale gray, then falls into pitch darkness. The campus, though modern in many aspects, still boasts old 18th century buildings, standing among ancient trees that creak in the night breeze. For some students, this atmosphere is romantic, poetic, even inspiring. But for those living in the older dormitories, particularly the colonial-era West Lodge, night is not a time for inspiration, but rather a time when the campus whispers begin to be heard. The hallways of West Lodge are long and narrow, the floors made of aged wood that creak even with the slightest footstep. The walls are painted a dull white, with patches of damp that never quite disappear. During the day, the building looks ordinary, if a little gloomy. But as the sun sets, long shadows from the tall windows fall onto the floor, transforming the atmosphere. It's as if the building is waiting to breathe, waiting for the night to reveal its true face. New students are always told a legend before they truly settle in. It's simple: don't walk alone in the hallways after midnight, because your footsteps won't be the only ones heard. This story has been passed down for years, so long that no one can say for sure when it was first told. Some say it dates back to the 1960s, when a female student was found hanged in her room. Others say it's even older, from when the building was still used as a small hospital during World War II. The seniors tell the story with serious faces, but also with a sense of excitement, hoping to scare their juniors. You can hear those footsteps from down the hall. They say, slow, steady, but never getting close. They just follow you, just making sure you're not alone. Some students laugh, calling it just another old scare story. But others can't help but laugh. Because on some nights, when the wind is strong, something can indeed be heard amidst the silence. West Lodge Dormitory and its atmosphere. The building has 3 floors. The rooms are lined up in straight rows, with old wooden doors, engraved with numbers on brass plates. A spiral staircase at the end of the hallway leads to the next floor, creaking softly underfoot. On the ground floor is a common study room, complete with long wooden tables, old bookshelves, and a long unused fireplace. West Lodge is surrounded by a small garden of maple and oak trees, whose branches obscure most of the windows. In autumn, fallen leaves pile up in the courtyard, adding to the melancholy atmosphere. In winter, a thin mist often hangs low around the building, making it seem like it's in another world. For some arts or literature students, living at West Lodge is a romantic experience, as if they're living in an English Gothic novel. However, after a few weeks, the charm fades, replaced by an inexplicable sense of unease. Many report not sleeping well, hearing faint whispers, or simply feeling watched from the corner of the room. New students and the first night. A new school year always brings new faces. That year, a student named Claire was assigned a room on the 2nd floor, number 213. Claire had arrived from out of town, full of enthusiasm, carrying a large suitcase and a stack of notebooks. She had heard rumors about West Lodge, even before arriving, but dismissed them as mere jokes. Her first night in the room, she heard the faint sound of someone walking in the hallway. It was already 1 a.m. At first, she thought it was just other students returning from a party. But the footsteps were too steady, too quiet, as if they were deliberately being heard. She waited for the sound to pass, but strangely, the sound never truly went away. It was as if someone was pacing back and forth right in front of her door. Claire covered her ears with a pillow, trying to sleep. But from that night on, a sense of unease grew within her. Stories from the seniors. The next day, Claire met with some of the seniors who had been staying longer in the building. One, David, a senior, with a calm face but a serious look in his eyes, said, "If you hear footsteps in the hallway, don't try to open the door. Just let it be. Don't even try to see. Who's there?" Claire chuckled, thinking David was just trying to scare her. But David's expression didn't change. He added, "Trust me, it's better not to know who's walking around out there." From then on, Claire began to notice how many students at West Lodge slept with the lights on, or at least left a desk lamp flickering in the corner. Not without reason, but because they never felt comfortable in total darkness. The hallway and the never-ceasing sound. The sound of footsteps wasn't just a legend. Students who lived there for more than a semester knew all too well what it felt like to hear that sound. It wasn't loud nor fast, just a steady tap, 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 tapping along the wooden floor. What made it terrifying wasn't the fact that the sound was there, but that no one was there when you tried to check. Some students who dared to open the door found the hallway empty, just a dim yellow light and long shadows on the walls. However, more than one person swore that they had opened the door just as the sound stopped, in front of their room. And there, despite the apparent emptiness of the hallway, a piercing chill escaped through the crack, sending shivers down their spines. Claire, without realizing it, had now become part of that cycle of stories, and each subsequent night would prove more and more that the legend of Roehampton was no mere student's tale, but something far more real, darker, and closer than he could have ever imagined. Claire's second night at West Lodge began normally. She returned from the library around 10, carrying several thick notebooks. The air outside was quite chilly, and a brisk autumn wind blew, rustling the tree branches in the courtyard, making a whispering sound. A crescent moon hung, low in the sky, partially obscured by gray clouds. The second-floor hallway was quiet. Several bedroom doors were tightly closed, with only the occasional faint sound of music or the faint laughter of students still awake. The dark yellow lamps hanging from the ceiling cast a dim light, casting a dull glow on the polished wooden floor. Claire opened her bedroom door and entered. She turned on the desk lamp and placed her books on the wooden table near the window. That night, she intended to write a short essay on 19th century literature. However, before pen even touched paper, something made her turn. From behind her bedroom door, a soft sound came, like light footsteps. Not heavy steps, not hurried sounds. It sounded more like someone walking cautiously, dragging the tips of their shoes. Slightly tap, tap, tap. Claire held her breath. The sound felt too close, as if it were only a few steps from her door. She waited. The sound stopped. Silence fell again. She tried to ignore it. She turned on some soft music from her phone and went back to writing. But less than 5 minutes later, the sound came again. This time it was clearer. Slow, steady, advancing, pausing, then retreating again, as if someone were deliberately walking back and forth right in front of her door. Claire's heart pounded. She remembered David's warning the day before. If you hear footsteps in the hallway, don't try to open the door. She clenched her pen in her hand. Each second ticked by slowly. The sound remained, repeating itself, though now it seemed a little farther away, toward the end of the hallway. She ran to bed, pulled the covers over her head, and tried to sleep. But her sleep that night was filled with strange dreams, a black shadow walking down the hallway, a pale face pressed against the window pane. The next morning, when morning came, Claire felt exhausted. Her eyes were red, sleep-deprived. In the common dining room, she met another student named Hannah. They sat next to each other, eating toast and hot tea for breakfast. "You look so tired," Hannah said, looking at Claire. Claire nodded slowly, then tentatively asked, "Have you ever heard the sound of people walking in the hallway at night?" Hannah paused for a moment, then smiled wryly. "Don't tell me you have?" Claire nodded. Hannah looked down, stirring her tea. "Me too. Almost every week. Sometimes at 1, sometimes at 3. If you stay here longer, you'll get used to it, or you'll move rooms." Claire shivered at that. "So it's real. I'm not the only one hallucinating." Hannah looked at her seriously. "Everyone here knows. The sound is real. But don't try to find its source. It's not something you want to see." Third night. The next day, Claire stayed up late with several other students in the ground floor study room. They joked, read books, and watched movies on their laptops. Claire felt a little relieved to be around other people. But as the clock struck 12:30, one by one, they began to return to their rooms. Claire followed her up to the second floor. It was quiet. A breeze blew in from the window at the end of the hallway, carrying the damp scent of old wood. As she approached her bedroom door, she felt something. The air turned cold, as if an air conditioner was leaking from behind the wall. Then the sound came again. Tap, tap, tap. Claire froze. This time, the sound wasn't just audible, it seemed to resonate in her bones. She knew the footsteps were right behind her. Slowly she turned. The hallway was empty. No one was there. But the next second, the sound was heard again, this time at her door. Someone, or something, seemed to be standing there waiting. With trembling hands, Claire fumbled for the key and quickly unlocked the door. She stepped in, closed the door firmly, and leaned against it. The footsteps continued for several minutes, repeating themselves back and forth. Until finally, they faded away. That night, Claire didn't sleep. He just sat on the bed, the lights on, his heart pounding. Confessions of a Senior. A few days later, Claire came to David again. They sat on a bench in the campus garden, accompanied by the cool breeze. Claire finally dared to tell him about her experience. David listened with a grim expression. "You've become part of the story," he said quietly. "What do you mean?" Claire asked. David stared blankly at the West Lodge building. "Those footsteps aren't just passing ghosts. They say it's the spirit of an old student, one that never leaves. The more you hear it, the closer it gets. And if you ever get the courage to look, you might never be the same again." Claire swallowed. "Have you ever seen it yourself?" David was silent for a long moment before answering. "I haven't, and I never want to." Unusual nights. As the days passed, Claire began to realize one thing. At West Lodge, the night was never truly quiet. Even though the hallways seemed empty, even though all the bedroom doors were firmly closed, there was always something moving beneath the silence. Whether it was faint footsteps, a faint, indistinct whisper from the stairs, or simply the sound of a door creaking even when no one answered. At first, Claire tried to deny it. She covered her ears with loud music on her headphones, kept her nightlight on all night, and even occasionally slept in the shared study room, claiming it was more comfortable. But the fear never truly went away. In fact, it grew closer and closer. The living hallway. One night, around 2 in the morning, Claire woke suddenly. It wasn't from a nightmare, but from a sound coming from outside her room. She sat up, holding her breath. From the hallway she heard something. At first, it was just a soft tap, 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 steps that she had already become familiar with. But this time, there was an additional sound. The sound of a long sheet being dragged across the wooden floor, like a worn dress or coat scraping against a board. Claire pressed her ear to the door. The footsteps didn't move. She could feel it standing right in front of her bedroom door. Suddenly, a soft knock sounded. Once, twice, 3 times. Claire froze. Her hands trembled. She clearly remembered David and Hannah's warning, never open the door if you hear something outside. The knocking stopped, replaced by the sound of heavy breathing, very close, as if separated only by a thin layer of wood. Claire stepped back slowly, hugging herself. The breathing lingered for a long time before finally fading away. The next morning, Claire discovered something that made her blood boil. Right under her door, on the wooden floor, was a dark, long mark, like the wet trail of something being dragged. Hannah's story. When Claire told Hannah about her experience, her new friend's face immediately paled. They sat in the ground floor study, accompanied only by the dim light of a desk lamp. "I've been there too," Hannah said softly. "Last year, I heard the same sound. Footsteps, then a knock. But I was stupider than you. I peeked through the door hole." Claire held her breath. "What did you see?" Hannah lowered her head, bit her lip, and whispered. "I saw a black shadow. Tall, very tall. His figure was indistinct, like a thick fog. But his eyes were red, staring straight at me. Since that night, I haven't slept well again." Claire shuddered at that confession. The atmosphere in the study room suddenly felt colder. The voice in room 219. A few days later, a strange incident befell the occupant of room 219, a male student named Marcus. Marcus was known to be cheerful and playful. But one night, around 3 o'clock, he screamed so loudly that he woke almost the entire second floor. Other students ran out of the room, including Claire and Hannah. They found Marcus standing in the hallway, his face pale and his body trembling. "Someone's in my room," he shouted in panic. "I heard footsteps inside. I saw a shadow in the corner, and then a voice whispered in my ear." The other students tried to calm him down, but Marcus insisted he wasn't lying. The next day he temporarily moved into a friend's room in another building, refusing to sleep alone in 219. Word spread quickly. West Lodge became increasingly known as a haunted building, and many students began avoiding the second-floor hallway unless absolutely necessary. Shadow in the staircase. A few days later, Claire herself experienced an incident that nearly made her lose her mind. That night, she returned home from the library late, around 11:15. The campus hallways were deserted, except for the faint glow of the garden lights. Entering West Lodge, she climbed the spiral staircase to the second floor. Her footsteps echoed softly off the stone walls. But when she reached the turn of the first-floor staircase, she stopped. There was something at the top of the stairs. A tall shadow stood motionless, blocking out the light from the hallway lamp. It didn't move, it didn't make a sound. Claire took a step back, her heart pounding. The shadow seemed to be looking down slightly, as if watching. Then, without a sound, he disappeared. Claire ran to the second floor without looking back. Once in her room, she locked the door tightly and cried silently. Collective night. The scariest night came a week later. That night, almost everyone on the second floor was awakened by the same sound. Footsteps. Not just one, but many. Like a group of people walking back and forth in the hallway. The students opened their doors, staring at each other with fear. The hallway seemed empty, but the sound remained, swirling around them. Then, the hallway lights began to flicker. A door creaked from the end, even though all the doors were open. The air turned piercingly cold. Suddenly, a scream was heard from the stairs. Everyone panicked, shutting their bedroom doors and hiding. The next day, no one knew who had screamed that night. No one confessed. But from that night on, all the students on the second floor agreed. There was something in West Lodge that couldn't be explained. And it wasn't just haunting one person, but everyone who lived there. Exploration. The following days at West Lodge felt stifling. The sound of footsteps had become part of the nightly routine. No one knew when they would come. Sometimes it was 1 o'clock, sometimes 3 o'clock. Sometimes they lingered for a long time, sometimes only briefly. But one thing was certain, everyone had heard them. Some students chose to move to other buildings, asking the university to relocate their dorms for health reasons. But others, whether out of curiosity or stubbornness, remained. Claire was among them. Since that collective night when the entire second floor heard the footsteps, Claire felt increasingly trapped. Her fear mixed with an uncontrollable curiosity. She couldn't accept that the answer was simply a ghost walking the halls. There had to be something more. Hannah's idea. One afternoon, Claire and Hannah sat in the campus backyard under a large oak tree. The leaves were falling, coating the ground in a golden brown. The autumn air was chilling, but their conversation was far colder than the wind. "I can't stand it anymore," Claire said. "I need answers. What exactly is going on there?" Hannah stared at her for a long moment, hesitant. "I've heard rumors. They say a student died at West Lodge decades ago. It was a suicide. They say they found him in the hallway, not in his room." Claire frowned. "Do you believe that?" Hannah sighed. "I don't know. But those footsteps, they felt like someone who never left the hallway. Like they were still walking, over and over, searching for something they'd lost." Claire bit her lip. "Then we have to find out." Library notes. The next night, Claire and Hannah went to the campus library. The large, glass-walled building stood in stark contrast to West Lodge. Bright, modern, and full of students busy studying. They searched through old university archives, documents rarely touched. After several hours of searching, they found something, an old newspaper article from 1965. The headline was terse: "Student found dead in Roehampton dormitory." The article named a name, Eleanor Price, a 19-year-old literature student. She was found, hanging in the second-floor hallway of West Lodge, right in front of room 217. There was no clear record of the cause, only speculation of academic pressure and personal issues. Claire read the article, her heart pounding. The second-floor hallway, right where they heard the footsteps. Hannah whispered, "Do you realize? Room 217 is just 4 doors down from yours." The plan. The next day, Claire invited Hannah and 2 other students, Marcus, who had previously experienced terror in room 219, and a senior named Sophie, to go on a night search. "We have to know what's really in that hallway," Claire said. "If it really is Eleanor Price, we have to be sure." Marcus looked uneasy but nodded. "I've been haunted for a long time. If we can find answers, I'm in." Sophie, with a serious face, added, "But we have to be careful. There's a reason this story has endured for decades. Not everyone who tries to find out can come back the same." The night of the search. The clock struck 12:15. The 4 students gathered in the second-floor hallway armed, only with a small flashlight and a notepad. The hallway lights were dim, some flickering as if about to go out. They sat on the floor, waiting. The atmosphere was tense. The only sound heard was the ticking of the wall clock, and the occasional sound of wind from the window at the end of the hallway. 15 minutes passed. Silence. Then the sound came. Tap, tap, tap. Slowly, steadily, advancing from the direction of the stairs. Everyone's eyes widened. The sound grew closer, clearer. Marcus clutched his knees, trembling. Hannah held Claire's hand tightly. Sophie turned on the flashlight, shining it down the empty hallway. There was no one there, but the sound persisted. Suddenly, the sound stopped right in front of room 217. Silence fell. Claire dared to take a step forward. "Eleanor Price," she whispered. Silence. Then, the air around them suddenly changed. The cold pierced their bones, their breath, becoming vapor. The hallway lights went out suddenly, leaving only the dim glow of Sophie's flashlight. From the direction of room 217, a knocking sound came. 3 times. Slow. Heavy. Knock, knock, knock. Claire held her breath, her heart almost bursting. Sophie whispered, "We have to go." But before they could move, something happened. The apparition. Sophie's flashlight flickered once, then went out. Darkness engulfed them. In the darkness, footsteps were heard again, this time very close. Not just one, but many. Like a group of people walking around them. Marcus screamed in panic. Hannah shivered. Claire felt something pass behind her, so close that the hair on her neck stood on end. Then the flashlight flashed again. At the end of the hallway they saw it. A tall, hazy figure stood, her figure like mist. Long hair covered her pale face. A shabby white dress hung to the floor, and her eyes, a fiery red, staring straight at them. The hallway seemed to spin. Heavy breathing could be heard from all directions. The figure took one step, then disappeared. After that night, the 4 students ran back to their rooms. No one slept that night. The next morning, their faces were pale. They agreed not to tell the other students the details of what had happened, but among them, there was no longer any doubt. The legend was real. The footsteps in the West Lodge hallway were not just imagination. It was Eleanor Price, the student who never left the place of her death. And the more they heard the footsteps, the closer she seemed to come. Hidden history. The day after the apparition. That night left a lasting mark. Claire woke up with a heavy head, as if she'd run a marathon all night, even though she was actually lying in bed with her eyes wide open. When she went downstairs to the dormitory dining room, Hannah, Marcus, and Sophie were already sitting at the corner table. Their faces were pale, their eyes sunken as if they were sharing the same nightmare. "So," Marcus began hoarsely, "we all saw the same thing, right?" Claire nodded slowly. "A woman. A white dress. Long hair. And her eyes," Sophie added softly. "Red. It wasn't just a spirit. There was something very wrong with her." A silence hung. They knew what they were experiencing wasn't a collective hallucination. It was real. And somehow they felt like it was just the beginning. Back to the archives. Claire felt they had to dig deeper. The old article about Eleanor Price was just a small piece in a larger mosaic. She convinced Hannah to accompany her back to the library the following evening. They requested access to the restricted archives, which could only be opened with permission. The librarian, an elderly woman named Mrs. Whitaker, eyed them suspiciously when she heard the request. "Are you sure you want to read the West Lodge files?" she asked warily. Claire nodded. "We're writing a research essay on the history of the old campus building. Any records would be very useful." Mrs. Whitaker stared at them for a long moment, then sighed. "Many students have tried to trace the history of West Lodge, but not many have succeeded in completing their research." Claire and Hannah exchanged a look. The words sounded like a warning, not just an explanation. 1940s reports. In the archives, they found a large box labeled West Lodge, 1930 to 1970. The smell of old paper filled the air. Among the stacks of renovation reports, occupancy lists, and administrative papers, Claire found a 1943 investigative report. Its title was "The Mysterious Death of a Female Student in Roehampton." The report mentioned a student named Margaret Holloway, found dead on the steps of West Lodge. The cause of death was unclear, though witnesses reported hearing a long scream before her body was discovered. Claire swallowed. So it wasn't just Eleanor. Hannah flipped to another page. There was a note in the margin written in the handwriting of a former university staff member. Some students believe Margaret pushed herself, but others say she was pushed. The hallway was haunted even before Eleanor. Claire shivered. So the hallway had been harboring darkness even decades before. Rumors about West Lodge. That night, the 4 students gathered again in Sophie's room. They laid out documents on the table, like detectives unraveling a mystery. So before Eleanor, there was Margaret, Hannah said, pointing to an old report. That was in 1943, decades before. Marcus narrowed his eyes. So, is West Lodge really cursed then? Sophie shook her head. It's not a curse. I heard a rumor from my history professor. They said West Lodge wasn't a dormitory. It was built in the 19th century and served as a small hospital. During World War I, many soldiers died there. Claire shuddered. If that's true, then that hallway has been full of death for a long time. Marcus stared at them, his face pale. Then what we saw last night wasn't just Eleanor. There could have been more. Second night of research. They decided to return to the hallway, this time more prepared. Marcus brought a small camera. Sophie an old tape recorder, while Claire prepared a notebook to document everything that happened. At exactly 1 a.m., they sat again on the floor of the second-floor hallway. It was cold and silent, just like the night before. Footsteps could be heard. Tap, tap, tap. But this time it was different. There wasn't just one footstep. There were 2. One heavy, dragging, the other light and fast. It was like 2 people walking together, even though the hallway was empty. The tape recorder picked up a faint sound, a whisper, so low it was barely audible. Sophie rewound it, and the voice came through clearly. Go. Marcus immediately panicked. It's a warning. We have to go. But Claire only became more convinced. No. This is proof. Eleanor wasn't the only one here. Margaret was too. Mrs. Whittaker's confession. The next morning, Claire plucked up the courage to approach Mrs. Whittaker in the library. Ma'am, she said in a low voice, we've found records on Eleanor and Margaret. Were there other students before them? Mrs. Whittaker was silent for a long time. Her face tensed, as if considering whether to answer. Finally, she whispered, since I started working here in the 1970s, I've heard a lot. There have been more than 3 deaths at West Lodge. All mysterious, all in the hallway or near the stairs. The university covered it up to avoid damaging its reputation. Claire was shocked. Why hasn't anyone exposed it? Mrs. Whittaker stared at her blankly. Some students try, but every time they get too close to the truth, something happens. They leave the university, or worse. Girls, you have to stop before it's too late. A deeper trail. Claire walked out of the library, her chest tight. Mrs. Whittaker's words echoed in her head. Something happened, but she couldn't stop now. The more she knew, the more compelled she was to keep going. The next night, she wrote in her notebook. Eleanor Price, 1965, hanging, second-floor hallway. Margaret Holloway, 1943, mysterious death in the stairs. Other cases, covered up by the university. West Lodge used to be a small hospital, many military deaths. Footsteps equals traces of the past? Claire stared at the writing for a long time. The more she wrote, the more she sensed a pattern. The hallway was like a magnet, drawing all tragedies into it. And somehow, she felt herself being drawn into that pattern too. Climax night. 2 days later, they returned to the hallway. This time, it wasn't just footsteps they heard. They also heard a woman crying. Sophie turned on the recorder. The sound was clear, heartbreaking, like someone grieving. Marcus took a photo of the hallway. In the resulting image, the faint shadow of a woman was visible in front of room 217. Hannah trembled. That's Eleanor. Suddenly, the hallway lights went out again. It was pitch black. Footsteps, crying, and whispers mingled together. The atmosphere was chaotic. Claire felt something tugging at the hem of her shirt. Hannah screamed. Marcus dropped the camera. In the darkness, a woman's voice rang out clearly, almost like a scream. I'm not alone. After that night, they ran out of West Lodge in a panic. No one could sleep that night. Claire opened her notebook and wrote down the last sentence of the voice recording. I'm not alone. It wasn't just a warning. It was the truth. Eleanor wasn't the only resident of West Lodge. The hallway was full, and the longer they lingered, the more the old residents began to reveal themselves. Room 217. A new obsession. Ever since they heard the voice, I'm not alone in the hallway, Claire's mind had been occupied with only one thing, room 217. All the stories, all the footsteps, all the apparitions always stopped, or centered in front of that door. Claire began to notice the room during the day. The wooden door was different from the other rooms. It was a darker color, the handle was rusty. No students had ever been seen coming or going. Even the resident nameplate on the door was empty, even though all the other rooms had name tags. When Claire asked the dormitory attendant, she only received a curt reply. That room hasn't been used in a long time. No further explanation was given. Hannah warned Claire not to go too far, but the obsession had grown. Claire was convinced the answer to all the mysteries of West Lodge lay behind the door of room 217. First attempt. One afternoon, Claire knocked on the door of room 217. There was no answer, but she felt a chill creeping through the crack like a gust of underground air. She tried the doorknob. It was locked. Marcus, passing by, reprimanded her. "Claire, are you crazy? If the guards find out, we could be in big trouble." Claire just stared at the door. "I have to know." Marcus shook his head and left, but his eyes were filled with curiosity. A clue from the archives. The next day, Claire and Hannah returned to the archives. They looked up the list of past residents of West Lodge. In the 1960s records, room 217 was listed as Eleanor Price. Claire swallowed hard. So it was true, the room belonged to Eleanor. But even more surprising, in the 1940s records, the room was also occupied by Margaret Holloway. Hannah closed the notebook, her face pale. Two people who died, both lived in this room. It can't be a coincidence. Claire gripped the notebook tightly. Room 217 is the source. Plan to open the door. The next night, Claire presented her idea to the group. "We have to go into room 217. Marcus immediately refused. "No, you're out of your mind. We're already haunted enough. If you open that door, who knows what might come out." Sophie looked at Claire seriously. "But she's right. If we don't open that room, we'll never know what really happened." Hannah looked down, hesitant. But finally she nodded. "I'll go, but only if we do it together." Trial night. They gathered in the hallway at 12:30. Sophie brought a small lockpick she'd borrowed from a friend in the engineering department. Door 217 stood solid, its paint peeling, as if daring anyone to touch it. Sophie crouched down, trying to unlock it. It took a few minutes, then there was a click. The door opened slightly, making a creaking sound. As soon as the door opened, a piercing cold air rushed out, making them all shiver. "Ready?" Sophie whispered. Claire nodded. Together they pushed the door fully open. Inside the room 217 was completely dark, a musty smell stinging the nostrils. The air inside felt heavy, as if no one had entered for decades. With flashlights, they examined the room. All the furniture was still there, the old bed, the wooden table, the wardrobe. But everything was covered in thick dust. On the walls, the wallpaper had peeled off, revealing black marks like burn marks. Marcus turned on the camera. "Oh my, this is like a time capsule." Claire walked over to the table. On it was an old notebook, its leather cover cracked. She blew the dust away and opened the first page. Fine handwriting covered the page. Eleanor Price, 1964. Diary. Hannah covered her mouth, shocked. "It's Eleanor's." Reading the diary. Claire began reading softly. "I can't sleep. The footsteps always come at night. They walk down the hall, right in front of my door. Sometimes I feel like someone stops there. Sometimes I hear whispers calling my name." Claire glanced at her friends. Everyone froze. She continued reading. "I asked the seniors about this room. They just told me to be quiet. But I discovered something. Before me, Margaret lived here. She heard the same thing, and she died in the hallway. I fear I will suffer the same fate." The last page contained only one sentence, written in messy ink. "The hallway demands sacrifice." Disturbance in the room. Suddenly, the door to room 217 slammed shut behind them. Marcus ran to the door and pulled the handle. It was locked. The flashlight began to flicker. Footsteps sounded again, this time from inside the room, not from outside the hallway. Claire froze. From the corner of the room, a shadow began to form. It was a woman in a white dress, her long hair covering her face. It was Eleanor. But next to her, another figure faintly emerged. A different woman, her face destroyed, her dress. From the 1940s. It was Margaret. The two figures stood side by side, staring at them. Then a whisper echoed from all directions. "Join us. Terror rises." Sophie turned on the recorder. The sound of crying was clear, so close it felt like it was right in their ears. Marcus panicked, dropping his camera. Claire felt something touch her shoulder. She turned. No one was there, but the cold fingerprints remained on her skin. Hannah screamed as the old wardrobe in the corner of the room opened by itself, its door creaking softly. From inside, there was a loud, repeated knocking sound, as if someone were trapped inside. Claire clutched Eleanor's diary tightly. She felt it was the only book that could answer all the mysteries. Exiting the room. Finally, the door to room 217 opened by itself. They ran out the hallway without looking back. Once outside, they were both breathing heavily, their faces pale, their bodies trembling. Claire still held Eleanor's diary. "We can't stop now. The answer is here." Sophie stared at her intently. Answer or a curse? Claire didn't answer. But deep down he knew. They had gone too far to turn back. Room 217 wasn't just an empty room. It was a doorway to something much darker. Eleanor's diary. The night after room 217. They returned to their rooms, exhausted and confused. But Claire couldn't sleep. Eleanor's diary was in her hand, and curiosity burned more than fear. The study lamp was dim. Claire flipped through the pages, trying to understand Eleanor's story. From her own writing. The more she read, the clearer it became that what had befallen Eleanor was not an isolated incident, but rather the continuation of something much older. First note. In the opening pages, Eleanor wrote enthusiastically about her arrival in Roehampton. "I'm happy to be accepted here. West Lodge is an old building, but I love the atmosphere. It's like a house full of stories." Claire read it bitterly. That youthful enthusiasm had turned to terror within just a few weeks of Eleanor's stay in room 217. Initial disturbances. A few pages later, the mood changed. Eleanor's writings began to fill with complaints about nighttime disturbances. "I often hear footsteps in the hallway. At first I thought it was just another student, but it gets stranger and stranger. No doors open or close, just footsteps that stop right in front of my room. Sometimes I smell metal like blood, even though the hallway is clean." Claire shuddered as she read the notes. Her experience was exactly the same as what they were experiencing now decades later. Margaret's name. On one page, Eleanor mentioned Margaret's name. "Today I heard a story from a senior. She said this room used to belong to a girl named Margaret Holloway. She was found dead on the stairs. They say she fell, but some believe she was pushed. Some students swear they still hear her screams at night. I can't stop thinking, why was I assigned to the same room? Is the university deliberately hiding something?" Claire swallowed. She remembered the 1943 report she had read in the archives. It all fit. Growing fear. The more pages Claire read, the deeper she felt Eleanor's fear. "I tried lighting a candle at night, hoping the light would chase away the shadow. But instead I saw something in the mirror. A strange woman's face, standing right behind me. I didn't sleep all night. I heard a knocking sound coming from the closet. When I opened it, there was nothing, just a terrible, pungent smell. I felt like someone was watching me all the time. Even the daylight wasn't safe anymore. I had to find a way out before it was too late." Missing pages. As she reached the middle of the book, Claire found several torn pages. The rips were messy as if someone had ripped them out in a hurry. She wondered who had torn those pages. Eleanor herself, or someone after her. Hannah, sitting next to Claire, whispered, "Maybe those pages contain something too dangerous." Claire gripped the book tighter. The loss of the story only made her more curious. Final note. The final pages of the diary made Claire's hairs stand on end. Eleanor's handwriting was increasingly messy, ink staining the paper, as if it had been written in a hurry. "I can't escape. The footsteps get louder every night. Sometimes I feel like they're in the room, not in the hallway. I hear whispers. They're calling my name, asking me to open the door. I'm afraid if I do, I won't come back. I saw Margaret in a dream. She was standing at the end of the hallway, her hand outstretched to me. She wasn't alone. There were many other faces behind her, all blank, eyeless. They say the hallway demands sacrifice. I'm afraid I'm next." Claire closed the book with trembling hands. On the last page, a large ink stain, or perhaps blood, covered some of the writing. Group discussion. The next day, the 4 students gathered in an empty study room to discuss the diary. Sophie placed the recorder on the table. If what Eleanor wrote is true, then the hallway isn't just haunted. It's a kind of cycle. Every generation, there's a new victim. Marcus slapped his forehead. So are we next? No, I won't let myself be a part of that. Hannah looked at Claire. Do you realize? Eleanor tried to fight back, but she still lost. Are you sure we can succeed? Claire clutched the diary tightly. We have the advantage. We know the story. We know this isn't just a ghost. If we can find out what they want, maybe we can stop the cycle. Hidden clues. Sophie took the book and examined each page. She noticed an ink stain on the last page. Look at this, she said. There are faint letters behind the smudge, like a word that's almost been erased. Carefully, they shone the flashlight on it. It read, closet. Marcus shuddered. Closet? You mean the one in room 217? The one that opened by itself that night? Claire felt her stomach twist. If that's true, maybe there was something Eleanor hid there before. She died. New decision. They all looked at each other. No one wanted to go back to room 217, but curiosity and the feeling of being trapped left them no choice. If there's something in that closet, Claire said firmly, it's the key to the mystery of West Lodge. And we have to find it. Sophie sighed heavily. Okay, but if we do this, we have to be prepared for whatever's behind that closet. Marcus looked away, fear evident. But finally he nodded. They all knew. The way back was closed. Room 217 had called to them once, and this time, the closet was waiting. Open-ending. That night, the Roehampton campus seemed quiet as usual, but this time the silence felt different. Much denser, heavier, as if the air itself was holding its breath. After the various terrors that had befallen the old dormitory, most students had opted to sleep in friends' rooms, while others had stayed overnight off campus. But the hallway remained, silent, long, waiting for new victims. The final entry in a student's diary, found on a study desk in room 2C, was written in hasty scribbles. The words were broken. The ink seemed to have been smeared by a trembling hand. He wrote about how the footsteps had become more frequent, sometimes stopping right in front of his door. The smell of damp, mixed with blood, grew stronger, and every time he closed his eyes, he felt a pale face pressed against the glass of his small window. Some campus staff, when asked to come in to investigate, were reluctant to go through the second-floor hallway. One security guard recounted how a door that was supposed to be locked suddenly opened by itself, emitting a long, ear-piercing creak. When he turned on the flashlight, there was no one there, just old walls with peeling paint and shadows that moved as if following the light. Rumors abounded. Some believed the spirit wasn't just one, but a collection of spirits trapped there, the result of repeated tragedies over decades. Students who disappeared, committed suicide, or fell ill suddenly were said to never truly leave the dorm. Every footprint belonged to those who wished to be remembered. But others claimed something even more terrifying. The entity wasn't a living person. It was simply something born from the residents' fears. The more fearful they were, the more real it became. It grew from whispers, from anxiety, from midnight knocks on the door. The university tried to keep the case under wraps. Renovations were promised, new lights installed, fresh paint covering the cracked walls. But anyone who had lived there knew that paint and light would not dispel the darkness that had taken root. To this day, new students occupying second-floor rooms often complain of the same thing. The sound of footsteps in the hallway as the clock strikes midnight, always slow and rhythmic as if someone is walking toward their door. If they're brave enough to open it, the hallway appears empty, but the floor is wet, stained with marks that never quite disappear. Some swear they see their neighbors' doors slowly opening, even though no one is inside. Others feel a cold breath on their necks when walking alone. And one thing remains constant. Those who dare to stare too long at the end of the hallway often don't feel the same afterward. Some fall ill for no apparent reason, some move out of their rooms with pale faces, and some simply drop out of college. Who knows what they see there, at the end of the seemingly endless, dark hallway? The mystery of Roehampton University remains open. There's no official conclusion, no satisfactory explanation. Just long, silent hallways, disembodied footsteps, and doors that seem to be waiting to be reopened. Perhaps tonight, if someone stands still in the middle of that old dormitory corridor, they'll hear a faint sound, the pattering of footsteps slowly approaching, and as their heart races, they might realize one thing: not all doors are meant to be opened, and not all hallways are meant to be explored. Because at Roehampton, midnight isn't the time to sleep. It's the time when the walls breathe again, and the spirits, or whatever they are, rise to remind us that they're still there. The end of the story remains a secret. Only the old hallways know, and the footsteps never stop.